My parents chose not to attend my graduation because my older sister, who was supposed to graduate the year before but failed, wanted to have a party to lift her spirits instead. However, my grandparents, after learning about the situation, decided to cut off financial support to my parents. Instead, they offered to give that money to me, and I happily accepted. I'm a 22-year-old guy, and my older sister, Jackie, is 24. She has always been treated like the little princess of the family. She should have completed college last year, but that didn't happen. It wasn't because the school kicked her out, though, honestly, she might have deserved it, considering how terrible both her grades and attendance were. Instead, she made the decision to drop out in her final year, believing she was destined for a music career, her so-called true passion. Jackie joined a band with some college friends during her second year, and for a while, things seemed to be going well. But, realistically, everyone knew that quitting school for it was a terrible idea. It was just a phase, and we all saw it coming. I chose not to say anything because, first, it wasn't my place, and second, I knew she wouldn't appreciate me weighing in on her life choices. The people who should have guided her, our parents, instead encouraged her to quit college and pursue music, enabling her to play gigs with her bandmates. The issue? Jackie wasn't even a good singer. She was barely passable, more of a bathroom performer at best. That was the key difference between her and the rest of the band. The others were actually talented. To this day, I have no idea why they even let her be part of the group. But anyway, 6 months after she and her 5 bandmates dropped out of college to focus on their music careers, she got kicked out of the band. They replaced her with a far better vocalist, someone who could actually write her own songs. It was a crushing blow for Jackie, and she ended up moving back home with no degree and no real career prospects. She tried to start her own band, but unsurprisingly, no one was interested. None of her friends were musicians, and nobody was foolish enough to put their lives on hold just to chase her fleeting dreams. Ever since she was dropped from the band, she's been unemployed and living off our parents' money. What baffles me is that my parents fully support this, acting as if she went through some kind of life-altering tragedy and needs time to recover. Meanwhile, I see it for what it really is, just the consequences of her own decisions. I don't feel the slightest bit sorry for her. If she had been realistic about her abilities, she wouldn't be in this situation. To make things worse, the original band she joined in college was made up of people who had been friends since high school. Naturally, they were much closer to each other than they ever were to Jackie. It was only a matter of time before they cut her loose. What frustrates me the most is how unfair it is that my parents continue to support her financially. She's an adult now, yet they allow her to live at home rent-free, doing absolutely nothing, while I've had to work hard for everything. The reason I find this so unfair is that when I graduated from high school, my parents made it clear that since I was no longer a student, I was on my own. I would have to fund my own way through college, and that was just how things were. It didn't shock me because I knew they had even made Jackie pay for her own tuition, so I never expected any special treatment. By that point, it was obvious to me that they had a favorite, and since it wasn't me, I accepted the reality that I'd have to rely on student loans and part-time jobs to get through college. But then, seeing how they let Jackie live at home rent-free while making endless excuses for why she wasn't working made me realize just how different our treatment really was. They were more than willing to financially support her, even as an adult, while I had to struggle to stay afloat. That realization made me resent the blatant favoritism, and I started calling them out on it. We had plenty of heated arguments over the issue, but they always managed to manipulate the situation emotionally and turn it against me. No matter how much I protested, they got their way. For a long time, I found it difficult to fully cut ties with them, but last week, they finally gave me the perfect reason to walk away. A few days ago, I asked them to come to my graduation party, which is happening soon. My university isn't far, it's only a 2-hour drive, so attending wouldn't have been a huge inconvenience. But instead of agreeing, they started making excuses about work. I found that odd because, realistically, they could take just one day off to be there for me. So I pushed back, pressing them for the real reason they weren't coming. And after a bit of back and forth, they finally admitted the truth. They were throwing a party for my sister on the same day. The irony? My graduation date happened to fall on the exact day Jackie was supposed to graduate last year. Except, of course, she never made it that far. She had dropped out 8 months before finishing her degree, and recently, she'd been feeling down about it. In an attempt to cheer her up, my parents decided to throw her a party, though she wasn't even aware of it yet. I was stunned. They could have easily postponed her party and come to my graduation instead. After all, my ceremony was an actual milestone, while hers was just a made-up celebration to make her feel better. I assumed they'd do the logical thing and reschedule, but instead, they insisted that I should be understanding. They needed to be there for Jackie on that day because, according to them, she needed their support more than I did. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They were seriously prioritizing a pity party for my sister, who had thrown away her own opportunities, over their own son's graduation. By that point, I had already been struggling with my relationship with them, and this was just the breaking point. I completely lost it on the phone. I called them out for never caring about me, for always putting Jackie first, and for enabling her failures instead of pushing her to grow. I told them they were setting her up for a life of stagnation by constantly babying her, and at the same time, they were destroying their relationship with me. They were ensuring I would never trust them again. Even after all of that, they didn't apologize. They didn't even acknowledge how hurtful their actions were. Instead, they brushed it off, telling me I was overreacting and that it was just a graduation. According to them, it didn't matter if they weren't there because Jackie supposedly needed them more. That was the moment I realized I was done. I didn't see any point in continuing the conversation with my parents, so I just hung up. Instead, I decided to call my grandparents and ask them to attend my graduation. My mom's parents live out of state, and since we aren't particularly close, I reached out to my dad's parents instead. Unlike my parents, they had always supported me. In fact, they were the ones who helped me secure a student loan and even co-signed for me because I didn't want to rely on my parents. They've always understood that I don't have the best relationship with my mom and dad, and they've been sympathetic towards me. Over the years, they've tried to reason with my father multiple times, pointing out how unhealthy and unfair it is to treat Jackie and me so differently. Of course, their words never changed anything, but the fact that they even made the effort has always meant a lot to me. That's why I've had a strong bond with them. So, if my parents refused to show up for my graduation, there was no question. I wanted my grandparents there instead. When I called them, I explained everything, and I was so upset that I ended up crying. They could tell how much this was affecting me, and even though none of this was their fault, they kept apologizing for the way things had turned out. It was obvious that they felt terrible about what I was going through. After listening to me, they reassured me that they would absolutely be there at my graduation. But beyond that, they also made it clear that my parents weren't going to get away with treating me like this. Not just this time, but for all the countless times they had hurt me in the past. I could hear the anger in their voices. They were furious. When I asked what they planned to do, they simply told me I'd find out soon enough. I had no idea what that meant until later that night, when I got a call from my dad just after 1 a.m. The moment I answered, he started shouting at me, calling me selfish and unreasonable. He accused me of being a drama queen for no reason, and I had no idea what he was even talking about. I had to interrupt him, asking him to calm down and actually explain what was going on because I was completely lost. At first, he refused to believe me and insisted that I was just pretending to be innocent. But eventually, he spilled everything. A couple of hours after I spoke with my grandparents, they had shown up at my parents' house, and all hell had broken loose. Apparently, my grandparents didn't hold back. They called my parents leeches of the highest order, and even went as far as calling Jackie a brainless, lazy cow. Harsh, maybe, but honestly, not inaccurate. Ever since Jackie dropped out of college, my grandparents had been unknowingly supporting her, sending my parents money every month. Money they thought was being used wisely. My grandfather, who runs his own business and is financially much better off than my dad, had been helping them out for years. But that night, he finally decided enough was enough. He wasn't going to let them keep taking advantage of him anymore. My dad had been feeding my grandparents lies, telling them that Jackie was actively job hunting but just hadn't found the right opportunity yet. That was complete nonsense. I knew for a fact that Jackie hadn't been looking for a job at all. Every time I visited home, she was either lounging around the house or out drinking with her friends. She had no intention of working hard or being responsible, and my parents were perfectly fine with that. But they also knew that my grandparents wouldn't be fine with it. So, they had been lying to them all along. After our conversation, I guess my grandparents finally decided they weren't going to tolerate this situation any longer. In hindsight, I think they had already realized long before I did that Jackie had no real intention of getting a job anytime soon. She had no reason to. Our parents were taking care of everything for her, and as long as she had a steady flow of money, she felt no pressure to change. She was perfectly content living off other people's support. Later, when I spoke to my grandparents, they explained their reasoning. Even though they had known Jackie wasn't actually trying to find a job, because, let's be honest, if she really wanted one, she would have found something in almost a year. They had continued sending money to my parents every month. They did it not just for Jackie, but also because they didn't want my parents to struggle on her behalf. But after hearing everything I told them, they decided enough was enough. My dad told me that when my grandparents arrived at their house, they made it clear they were cutting off all financial support. They weren't going to send another cent. That's when my parents turned to me and demanded that I talk to my grandparents and fix this mess because, according to them, it was all my fault for making such a big deal about them not attending my graduation. Then my dad made a crucial mistake. He let it slip that my grandparents had decided to send the money to me instead. That was the moment I hung up on him and immediately called my grandparents to find out if it was true. They picked up right away, and when I asked them if they were seriously planning to send me money every month, they confirmed it. They said this was their way of making up for everything I had been through. After all the struggles and unfair treatment I had endured, they felt I deserved an easier life after graduation. They assured me that whatever I did with the money was entirely up to me. They simply wanted to support the person who actually needed and deserved it. At first, I felt a little weird about accepting it. I had always planned to find a job and support myself after graduation, just like any responsible adult would. But then I thought, why should I make things harder for myself when I don't have to? There was no reason for me to struggle unnecessarily just because I had been conditioned to believe I had to. My grandparents were offering their help freely, and I had no reason to reject it. So, I happily accepted their offer. After that, my parents kept trying to call me, but I saw no reason to answer. Even Jackie started reaching out. By the next morning, my phone was flooded with missed calls and messages from all of them. But when I saw that every single one of their messages was about me fixing the situation and convincing my grandparents to resume sending them money, I decided I was done. I blocked them all. They all had the same argument, that I was being selfish and unreasonable. They claimed they needed the money way more than I did. Jackie, in particular, went on about how she wasn't emotionally strong enough to get a job right now. She said she was in the process of healing and working on herself so she could have a better future. And, apparently, I was being materialistic and lacking in empathy by not supporting her through this difficult time. At this point, I honestly don't care anymore. I've accepted my grandparents' financial help, and I have no regrets. Update 1. Hey, I really appreciate all the advice and support. I've decided to keep my parents and sister blocked, and honestly, I never even considered apologizing to them in the first place. Reading through all the comments here and talking to some of my closest friends only reinforced what I already knew. I was right to cut them off. I did have a few moments of doubt because, by nature, I struggle to stay angry at people for long. Holding grudges has never been easy for me, but I've come to realize that this isn't about holding a grudge, it's about standing up for myself. That's what this decision really is, a way to finally set boundaries and refuse to tolerate the way they've treated me for years. In the past, they always managed to emotionally manipulate me. No matter how many times I confronted them over legitimate issues, I always found myself going back, convincing myself that they were my family and that, deep down, they would have my back. That's what most people grow up believing. That family is supposed to be there for you unconditionally. But now, I see that their love has always come with conditions, and I'm done living by their rules. They can call me whatever they want. They can be as angry as they want. It doesn't matter to me anymore. My grandparents will be there at my graduation, and I already know my parents won't show up, but that's okay. I'd rather have the people who actually care about me there than force myself to pretend I have a family that supports me when they don't. I've also finally started opening up to my friends about my family situation, something I avoided for a long time. It always felt too personal to share, but recently, I realized I needed to let it out. I talked about everything with a few of my closest friends, and their reactions were nothing but supportive. They reassured me that I had nothing to feel guilty about, that I wasn't wrong for cutting off people who constantly treated me like a doormat. And honestly, that meant a lot. Now that I've found the courage to talk about it, I don't think I'll ever go back to pretending everything is fine. I refuse to let anyone, family or not, walk all over me anymore. Update 2. So my parents did show up at my graduation. Unfortunately, it's crazy how, when I actually wanted them there, they didn't care at all. But now that money is involved, suddenly, they're eager to be part of my life, calling me family, like none of this ever happened. Since they didn't have the required passes, they couldn't get into the ceremony. I made it clear to them that I wouldn't be speaking to them until everything was over. After the ceremony wrapped up a few hours later, my grandparents and I agreed to meet my parents at a nearby hotel for lunch. Before we even sat down, I told them straight up, I didn't want any arguments, no confrontation, and definitely no unnecessary drama. I was in a good mood, and I wasn't about to let them ruin that. Of course, they completely ignored that and brought it up immediately after we sat down. As soon as we sat down, my parents started apologizing profusely, admitting that they had treated me poorly. Even Jackie had supposedly realized her mistakes and wanted to apologize, though she couldn't make it because she had a job interview. Apparently, after her confrontation with our grandparents, she finally grasped how lazy she had been and how much she had taken everything for granted. My parents went on to acknowledge that they had failed me in a major way, admitting that I had been right all along. They agreed they had been terrible parents, not just to me, but to Jackie as well. They claimed they wanted to make things right and had come to talk, hoping my grandparents and I would hear them out and give them another chance. Before my grandparents could respond, I spoke up. I told them that while I appreciated their willingness to apologize, I didn't believe a word of it. To me, their remorse felt forced and insincere, especially given the circumstances. The fact that it took my grandparents cutting them off financially for them to suddenly realize their mistakes didn't sit right with me. If they were genuinely sorry, they wouldn't be rushing for my forgiveness. They would respect my need for space and let me come to terms with everything in my own time. Right now, I wasn't interested in giving them a place in my life again. My priority was to find a job, work hard, and build a life for myself, separately from them. I thought my response was more than fair, and even my grandparents agreed. But my parents weren't having it. Instead of accepting what I said, they started whining about how they had truly changed and no longer stood by how they had treated me. They claimed that as their child, it was my duty to forgive them because, after all, they had always forgiven me whenever I made mistakes as a kid. That comparison was laughable. I couldn't believe they were equating my childhood mistakes, things I did when I was literally a kid, to the conscious, repeated choices they had made as full-grown adults with children. It wasn't the same thing at all. I stayed firm and told them plainly. They had messed up, and I wasn't ready to forgive them. If they were truly sorry, they would respect my boundaries. If they refused to give me space, then I would know for sure that their apologies weren't genuine, that this was all just about keeping my grandparents happy so they could stay in their good graces and keep the money flowing. I was blunt, and I could tell they knew they couldn't manipulate their way out of this. That's when my mom resorted to the usual theatrics. Cue the tears. I had seen this act too many times before, and by now, I was immune to it. I calmly told her to cut it out, reminding her that we were in public, and I made it clear that if she kept making a scene, I would leave with my grandparents. She kept crying for a few more minutes, accusing me of being heartless and insisting that her tears were real. But I wasn't buying it. Eventually, I stood up, ready to walk away, and that's when she finally stopped and begged me to stay. At that point, I guess my parents realized they weren't going to talk their way out of this. By then, our food had arrived, so we ended up having a quiet, uneventful meal. They congratulated me at the end, but there was no real warmth or sincerity in their voices. And honestly, that was fine. I don't need their approval anymore. I have my grandparents by my side, and that's all that matters. I also feel incredibly relieved after speaking to my parents today. In a way, I think I got the closure I really needed. More than that, I'm proud of myself for standing my ground and not letting them manipulate me like they always have in the past. This time, I didn't cave, and that alone makes me feel like I'm finally moving forward. So, all in all, I'd say today was a pretty good day. Update 3. Hey, so it's been a couple of days since I met my parents for lunch after graduation and told them I wanted to remain no contact. Now, Jackie has decided to start trashing me on social media. What's really weird to me is how she is the one acting the angriest, even though she wasn't even there at the lunch. She and I have never been close, and she's had minimal involvement in my life. So I have no idea why she feels entitled to put me on blast publicly or why she thinks she can get away with saying whatever she wants about me. Yesterday afternoon, she posted about how I'm an ungrateful brat and how she's ashamed to be related to me. I had only blocked their phone numbers. I had completely forgotten to block them on social media, so I could still see her posts. She went on a full rant, cursing me out for how I had treated our parents and ended it with a dramatic ultimatum. Anyone who continued talking to me or associating with me would be cut out of her life. I honestly found it laughable. I mean, my parents have only ever done the bare minimum for me. But for her, they've bent over backward. So I completely understand why she treats them like they're flawless and can do no wrong, but I don't share that experience. To me, they haven't even been good parents, let alone the best ones in the world. I'm not going to pretend otherwise just to fit into her version of reality. At first, I simply commented on her post to explain my side of the situation, but she deleted my comment. Since she refused to let me respond directly, I had no choice but to make my own post. And now, here we are, stuck in a full-blown social media war. She's been painting me as an ungrateful child who turned his back on his loving parents, while I'm just trying to tell the truth. She's twisting the story to make herself and our parents look like the victims, completely ignoring the years of neglect, favoritism, and emotional manipulation I endured. Naturally, this has left a lot of people confused about whose side they should take. Since Jackie and I went to the same high school and are close in age, we have a lot of mutual friends, and now all of them are being dragged into this mess. I hate that this is playing out so publicly, but at this point, I don't have another choice. Instead of responding to every single person individually, I figured it's easier to just put everything out in the open so people can hear my side directly. It's frustrating, embarrassing, and honestly, exhausting. But this is where we are, and I'm just dealing with it the best I can. Update 4. Hey, so a lot of new information has come to light recently, and I think it's safe to say that I won't be forgiving my parents anytime soon. In fact, I don't think I'll ever forgive them at all. Initially, I thought I might just stay no contact for a few months, but after everything I've learned, I know now that this is permanent. The way I've been treated is beyond unfair, and I refuse to keep them in my life any longer. It's been 3 days since Jackie made that post, and we've been arguing nonstop. It's been exhausting, but I told myself I wouldn't back down until she did, and I'm so glad I stood my ground. The fight escalated to the point where she tried to defend our parents, making the outrageous claim that they had treated us exactly the same. That was a blatant lie. She insisted she wasn't more privileged than me, claiming that I was just playing the victim to gain sympathy from our grandparents. According to her, she had suffered just as much, if not more, because of the trauma she endured when her bandmates used her and then dumped her, shattering her dreams. She said she would have taken full advantage of her college education if it weren't for them misleading her and giving her false hope about her future in music. That's when one of her former bandmates stepped in and completely exposed her lies. He clarified that from the very beginning, Jackie had only been a temporary substitute in their band. Their original vocalist had moved to Australia before they started college, and Jackie was never meant to be a permanent member. They had told her this repeatedly. Even when the band decided to drop out of college and pursue music full-time, they had specifically advised Jackie not to follow their lead, because, frankly, she wasn't good enough. They had always planned to find a stronger vocalist, someone more talented and serious about music. So when they found their current singer, replacing Jackie wasn't even a difficult decision. And honestly, they had nothing to feel guilty about. They had been completely transparent about the situation from the start, but Jackie refused to listen. Dropping out of college was her decision, and it was a terrible one. Instead of taking responsibility, she twisted the story to make herself the victim, leaving out all the key details that didn't fit her narrative. But here's the kicker, the biggest lie of them all. For years, both Jackie and my parents insisted that she had taken out a student loan to pay for college, just like I did. But that same bandmate who called her out also revealed the truth. Jackie never took out any loans. In fact, she used to brag about how our parents were fully funding her education while the rest of them had to work part-time jobs and scrape by, hoping to land decent-paying gigs to cover their debts. That was it. That was the final straw. Once Jackie realized she had been exposed, she immediately went back and deleted all her posts, acting like none of it ever happened. But it's too late. I know the truth now, and there's no coming back from this. I'm done. I will never speak to my parents or Jackie again. They have lied to me repeatedly, manipulated situations to make themselves look like victims, and treated me like an afterthought my entire life. I refuse to be part of their twisted family dynamic any longer. My grandparents are also done. After seeing how deep the deception runs, they've decided to cut my parents and Jackie out of their lives completely. This chapter of my life is officially closed.